This is the Zodiac speaking. With those 5 words and a hand-drawn crosshair symbol, an unidentified killer began building a public persona that would dominate the California news cycle for years. In late 1968 and mid-1969, a series of shootings occurred at isolated lovers' lanes in Venetia and Vallejo. These attacks were sudden, brutal, and seemingly random. Because the murders took place in different counties, investigators struggled to find a single thread. There was no physical evidence at the scenes to suggest the crimes were the work of one person. To bridge these gaps, the killer began writing to the media. He wasn't looking to hide his crimes. He wanted to link them together to ensure his personal brand was amplified by the public. In August 1969, the San Francisco Chronicle and 2 other papers received nearly identical letters. The author claimed credit for the Vallejo murders and demanded his writing be published on the front page. He split his first major message into 3 separate pieces, threatening to kill a dozen people over the weekend if the newspapers refused to print the code. While the FBI and CIA analyzed the grid, 2 high school teachers in Salinas cracked it first. Donald and Betty A. Hardin assumed the killer was obsessed with his own actions and searched for the symbols that would form the word kill. The translated message described a fantasy of collecting slaves for the afterlife. However, it contained no biographical details and no real clues to his identity. The Z408 set the protocol for the rest of his campaign. From this point on, the Zodiac would communicate directly with the public through the press, using lethal threats to force the publication of his codes. In September 1969, the violence moved into the daylight. At Lake Berryessa, the killer approached 2 students while wearing a black executioner's hood featuring his hand-drawn symbol. 2 weeks later, the killer moved into downtown San Francisco. He hailed a taxi driven by Paul Stein and shot him at point-blank range in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Teenagers witnessed the crime and called the police, but the dispatcher mistakenly reported the suspect as a black male. This error allowed the killer to walk directly past 2 responding officers just minutes after the shooting. The Zodiac's actual murders were messy and often witnessed by others, yet his ability to evade capture despite these mistakes served only to strengthen the myth he was building through his letters. When investigators initially doubted his involvement in the Stein murder, the Zodiac mailed a piece of the victim's blood-stained shirt to the Chronicle. This physical proof allowed him to effectively seize control of the narrative. Included with the shirt was a new 340-character cipher. Despite being analyzed by the FBI's best cryptanalysts, the code remained completely unreadable for the next 5 decades. The swatch of fabric proved he was the killer, but the Z340 demonstrated the limits of forensic science at the time. Law enforcement now had the evidence, but no way to read the message it contained. By 1970, his codes became frustratingly short. One 13-character cipher followed the phrase, "My name is." Without enough text to reach unicity distance, the amount needed for a single solution, these short ciphers translated into hundreds of possible names, making them impossible to verify. Police eventually named Arthur Lee Allen as their prime suspect. But after years of investigation, his fingerprints, DNA, and handwriting failed to match any of the evidence severed from the letters or the crime scenes. The investigation reached a stalemate. The physical evidence didn't match the most likely suspect, and the remaining cryptographic clues were too short to solve. In December 2020, an international team of civilian programmers used modern processing power to finally attack the Z340. Their software ran 650,000 simulations to identify the specific transposition pattern used to scramble his words. The solved message was another taunt, claiming he wasn't afraid of death. Even after 51 years, the broken code provided no new leads. The Zodiac left behind a massive trail of letters, puzzles, and phone calls. But because he focused on psychological warfare rather than leaving forensic traces, he remained a ghost. The case remains open today because the Zodiac successfully gamed the media environment of the 1960s. He used cryptography and the press to build a legendary persona, showing that controlling the story was the most effective way to evade justice.